Welcome to the Reschool'd podcast, the show that discusses all the things that schools may have missed, with your hosts, AJ Kuti and Jason Gordon. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. We are the Reschool'd podcast, the show that discusses all the things that schools may not have prepared you for. I am AJ, and sitting across me, it's an early morning, man. Across from me is Jason. Yes. Jason, how you doing today? Hopefully better than me.
Oh, I'm doing great. I got one kid on the bus, so I didn't have to walk that direction to school. So that saved me a few minutes. And then the other one that, walked him to school it is a abnormally warm February day. So,
no kidding.
But it's wet outside. It's
80
messy
here in Georgia.
I know. I mean, I was sweating all day yesterday. That's not right for February. Just something feels wrong about that.
This is the fake spring before the hard winter comes, and then we'll get spring number 2 in Georgia.
Oh, yeah. We still need another freeze to come through and kill the plants that have already come out now.
Of course, naturally.
Do you
have a green thumb?
No, I kill everything that is in my yard.
I managed to kill fake flowers.
Really?
Yeah, you know how much skill that takes is to kill a fake flower?
We've had bushes out there in the yard that have been here for 10 years. We planted them 10 years ago. They're as hardy as all get out. There's hardly anything. And sure enough, this year we killed them.
Yeah.
Sure enough, finally.
Yeah, I'm bad. Like when somebody says, well, this is a plant you can have and it surely won't die. I'm like, you may want to bet?
Yeah. Just see what I can do. So yeah, but no, everything's going well this morning.
Good deal. Well, this episode, we are going to be continuing on with our parent-student dynamic series. This is the fourth episode, and today we're going to be talking about helicopter parents. So, which is kind of really, if you think about it, of the three last episodes that we've done, which is, career expectations, personal expectations, academic expectations of the parent and the student, I guess we're kind of ramping it up and getting into more or less possibly the extreme version of that parenting when we're talking about helicopter parenting. So does that sound good to you?
Absolutely. The thing is, you put all these things together and sometimes it's just overwhelming. It becomes the primary dynamic between parent and kid. So we got to treat this whole thing collectively. So, maybe this is the episode to listen to before you listen to the other ones. So
sure.
Before we jump in, though, I want to remind everybody, visit our website. That's Reschool'd with a D, not an ED. Check us out. Send us messages. Let us know what you want to hear about. Of course, you can see all our old episodes and things. And on your favorite social media apps and podcasting platforms and everything like that, share us, like us, comment on us, give us a rating. Hopefully it's all 5-4 stars, whatever is the best you can give us. And there you go. We just we need your support. We need your help, and help us get out there to the world.
That would be wonderful. We would really appreciate that. All right. So today's quick question, I think, is probably the most obvious quick question we've ever had on this show, and that is: did you have helicopter parents?
Yeah. If you've listened to the show before, you know very well I was the opposite end of the extreme. My parents gave me all the autonomy in the world and never really looked over much. I mean, every now and then they would check on, how you doing grade wise. They had to sign my report cards going through school and things like that. And, that was the extent of accountability, I think. But, when I got older, when I got in high school and stuff, I did pretty well in school. So they were always fine with what I was doing and just never put any pressure there. So I didn't have a whole lot of that. What about you?
I was pretty much the same way. I mean, I didn't have helicopter parents. They gave me a ton of leeway. And I didn't have to worry about anything really being overbearing. Did they enforce rules that at the time I wasn't a big fan of? Absolutely. But that doesn't constitute helicopter parenting. So I don't think I had helicopter. I got to live and learn and fail and succeed on my own. And so, I did not have helicopter parenting. Well, let's get into the main one because, that was, like I said, a pretty straightforward, quick question for the day. Okay, so first, let's just go ahead and define this. What do we mean when we say helicopter parenting? What are possibly some characteristics and stuff like that?
Well, I would say it's just an excessive level of involvement and control in your everyday life. And, that transcends just school and academia and all that things. It means just, not letting the child develop normally in terms of self-experiment, figuring out things for themselves, that type of thing. It's just excessive involvement. That's it in all facets of the life. So anyway, that's my definition of it. I'm sure if you Googled it, you're the Chat GPT expert, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you should ask Google or Chat GPT to explain helicopter parenting to you.
Well, I just Googled it to see if there's a technical definition. And what I'm getting is majority of it is just, magazines and blog posts and stuff like that. I do have something here.
There's a lot of self-help material out there on this topic. Yeah.
I did find something from the American Psychological Association. So, I mean, that's a little bit official. But really it boils down to, it's just this excessive attention given to everything the child does. And I mean, you can go back and, okay, so it's called helicopter parenting for a reason. They use helicopter as the descriptor because a helicopter hovers. It has the ability to hover. And that's really what helicopter parenting does, is you are hovering over your child, making sure that everything they do down to the micro level is in agreement of what you think they should do. So you kind of plan, you maintain, you essentially tell them what to do every move they make. That is the biggest extreme version of helicopter parenting. And there are, there's quite a few, I guess you can say, causes from that would cause a parent to become a helicopter parent. And then there's also quite a few consequences that can come from helicopter parenting.
The whole cause thing, I would say, might be beyond our pay grade in terms of that's going to be some level of psychological development in the parent. Their feeling or need to be that involved, to be that controlling over everything. That's something in them, something how they were raised. Just parents can get help with that type of thing. And, maybe we should do an episode where we have somebody who's a counselor who could speak to that. I have seen a lot of material online about that offer that type of help, right? Or at least some level of understanding, right? Even if you can't correct somebody's actions or their attitude, just making people aware of the consequences can be a big deal. So you want to, let's get some context to this. You want to try to, can you think of any examples where you've seen extreme helicopter parenting before? I mean, I've seen it in student, relationships with students before that I'm teaching, and all of a sudden their parents become very involved in their class. And then the student talks to you about the level of involvement of the parent in their life. And some of the stories are a little dizzying, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, some of them are to a certain degree, some of them are even just concerning. Like, it's just, I can see where it really, really becomes problematic. So if you're asking me, have I experienced it in my teaching? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had, like, I guess you would say the most extreme version of it would be having a student's parents email me asking me as a constant update on how the student is doing in class. Are they showing up to class? What are the grades like? And me having to essentially tell them, I can't discuss this with you without your student signing a form. And because of what FERPA laws. And so, which then there's always this part of me when I say something like that, there's always a part of me I almost feel hesitant because I feel like I'm opening up a can of worms for that student. Because if their parents are that focused on checking up on their every move, then they're probably more likely to force the student to sign that form.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've been sitting in my office before and had parents come in with their student, and mind you, these are 19, 20, 21-year-old students, right? Beyond the legal age of adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't even get to talk. The parent puts them in a side chair, and then the parent has a conversation with me about individual assignments, has conversation about overall performance in the class, what their child is going to have to do. And really, the conversation, is basically, it's not a triangular three-way conversation going on here. It's me talking to the parent. The parent looks over at the kid and confirms something or gets some information and then looks back to me to talk. But the expectation is that I'm talking to the parent, not the child. That's probably the most extreme thing I've seen, right? And it was completely obvious to me from those interactions that honestly, the parent is that involved in every aspect of the child's life. Everything from, okay, this is going to sound crazy, but there was a college student who had just graduated. She well, I can't make it that personal to tell you how
Sure.
I knew them, but the student was not allowed to drive. The college that they went to was downtown Atlanta, and the parents were so highly involved with the student's life. When the parent would drop the student off at school every day, would drive all the way from outside of the perimeter in Atlanta, which is an hour drive, to drop the student off, and would pick them up after classes. When the student would go to do work assignments, like, they had to do internships and things like that as part of their program, the parent would take them and would sit in the car and wait the entire time. I happen to know that this student sat for people, and the mother would drive the daughter to the babysitting gigs,
Lord.
and would sit there outside of the house in the car reading the entire time that the child babysat. And when I say child,
me absolutely bonkers.
This was a woman. This was not a child. This was a 21-year-old woman. And they were not allowed to drive because it was too, I don't know, dangerous to
It's
whatever.
time to cut the cord, woman. Time to cut the cord.
Oh, yeah, that's maybe the most extreme example of a helicopter parent I've seen. But then I've seen, in the majority of scenarios I see is the exact opposite extreme, where a little more parent involvement might be good.
Yeah.
Students just allowed to do everything they want to, anytime they want to. They're basically autonomous. The only reason I say they're not 100% autonomous is because they're still living under the parent's roof. It's like they have a separate life under the parent's roof, and depend on the parents' cooking and things like that. So I guess that's a good place we should start there. The two-way street there. Dependence on parents for financial support, for encouragement, motivation, all that kind of good stuff. Where's the line? Where and how much facilitation by a parent causes harm to the student in terms of their development? Because to a certain point, you're a helicopter parent throughout the child's development, right? And this impacts their development. So ultimately, when they're older, they become more dependent in ways they should not be upon the parent. And that's honestly what the parent wanted, right? They still like playing that role, being that involved and things like that. But in a way, it thwarts personal development, and that level of dependence causes issues in terms of, in this, we can talk about it in terms of career development. We could talk about it in terms of social development. We could talk about it in terms of how it affects later on your relationship with others once you get married and things like that, right? All of these things are going to be affected, right? So the idea of a helicopter parent goes a lot deeper than just school, but certainly we've seen it from the context of school. So,
well, I do think there's, because we keep talking about this extreme, and to me that's what it is, because if you look at it on a continuum, you have, at the low levels, you have more or less complete autonomy. The student has complete autonomy. The parents are there as somebody to talk to. I mean, that's essentially what they are. They're friends. They're not parents. And like you said, depending on the age, that could be, you may want them to be on that side, or you may not want them to be on that side. So like if you're talking about like a 4-year-old, you probably don't want them to be all the way down there. But if you're talking about like a 25-year-old, yeah, I mean, it's just it's your family. They're there for you, but they're not telling you what to do. As you move up, you have, parents, like I said, that 4-year-old kind of category, 5-year-old kind of category, where you have a young child, where they're taking care of you. I mean, the child is the responsibility of the parent, and you want to make sure that they're taken care of. You want to make sure they're protected. You want to make sure that they're learning, those kind of things. So the hovering, if you will, is a little bit more. But there's that threshold where you can be too much, especially when you get into maybe your teen years. And that threshold now begins to be almost pushed to see where the line is drawn. And sometimes the parent pushes that line a bit too far. Sometimes the parent pole vaults over that line. Yeah. I mean, and that's the extreme situation, because even like, I've said this before, I have an 18-year-old son. He turns 19 this year. There are still things that I will always be protective of. There are certain things that I'm not comfortable with. Now, granted, he has, more autonomy than maybe some when it comes to making those decisions about what's better for him in his situation. But at the same time, I'm comfortable with that because we gave him that autonomy early on to learn about repercussions, to learn about, okay, the choices you make, you're also going to have to live with any repercussion that comes with it. And if you're okay with that, and you're okay with the risk, then go for it. But you need to understand that there is a possible risk, and more or less make your decision based on that. So, teaching him at a younger age the importance of the decisions that you make now allows us to be a lot less protective, I guess you would say, of him. But again, there's still certain things that if he said, I'm going to go drive drunk, obviously that would not happen. And that is, if that's me being a helicopter parent, that's me being a helicopter. I'll take that and wear it as a badge of honor. But also there's laws against that too.
Sure.
So, then you have, like you said, the ones that are the extreme versions, which are micromanaging the person's life and every aspect of their life, no matter what the age is. And it's everywhere outside. It doesn't necessarily have to be only at school. It can be, you can have helicopter parenting from an employment standpoint, like you said, that the person who is babysitting, but even further than that, you can have helicopter parents who feel the need to talk to your boss if you're working at a private company or something like that.
Yeah.
That's
I've seen
not
that.
fun. Yeah.
So that's the overall context, right? That's what over-involvement, that's what under-involvement looks like, and you're going to see some spectrum or extreme. And don't get me wrong, there's going to be some point on that spectrum that works better for others, slight bit more involvement or a slight bit less involvement based upon an individual's personality and how quickly the child develops and things like that. Right. You don't want to thwart development in any way, and you don't want the child to suffer negative consequences because they do need help in some phase of development in terms of dealing with emotions or understanding what's, what they're going to face in life in terms of realities, practicalities, things like that. So with that being said, we should probably give some actionable tips that should, one for the parents and then one for the kids,
Before we do that, though, I do have a question, because you were bringing up some kind of a broad, very broad overview of consequences. Are there certain consequences that can come from helicopter parenting that are more severe than others, and maybe some that are not the most common? Like, when we hear stuff like, okay, well, you can say the low hanging fruit would be, they're not able to develop their own way. They're not able to actually grow. But are there some kind of other ones that we may not be seeing, or maybe it not be, the listeners may not be thinking about, that are also pretty defining in terms of consequences?
Sure. I mean, the psychological consequences obviously are going to be present, right?
Sure.
So one of the biggest parts of life is, the emotional development and how you relate to others in that transition. If you have an excessive level of parental involvement in certain points in your life, it harms that development, which has, rippling repercussions throughout the remainder of your life. You see it all the time in terms of overdependence of kids on their with their parents, right? Probably one of the most obvious places that you see it is in marital discord.
Mm-hmm.
That is,
Yeah.
you see sons, you hear about the scenario of sons that are too attached to their moms, right?
Mm-hmm.
Type thing. And the wife feels, and this is traditional male female relationship, right? Or marriage. The wife or female spouse to a male husband feels like the husband is not putting her first in terms of building a life together, and more closely associates with the parent and stuff like that. That's something you see chats about on forums, you read it in psychological articles and things like that. It's just that over closeness of the child to the parent can cause that. On the opposite side, lots of females have extremely close relationships with their parents. Now, and that extremely close relationship is forced upon them, right? There's a mandatory or a manipulated sense of obligation to include the parent in every aspect of your life. It ultimately can cause an inability to form a bond with your spouse, right? Because too much of your life is being decided and shared with your parent rather than developed autonomously as a couple together in terms of your life. And that's a major issue, right? So those are probably two of the most common you see. But so if you ask yourself, what's the repercussion there? Well, there's a failing there, right? There's an inability to form what is otherwise the prototypical healthy family relationship in the United States. Now, in other countries, there's this whole family thing, right? Many other countries, new married couples move into the parents' household and are still treated like kids, right? And you don't have that level of autonomy. That's something very common in like your Latin American countries, right? It's
Middle Eastern
something,
countries too.
yeah, it can be common in the Middle East as well. But we're more a Protestant, Germanic type culture in the United States. We're an autonomy culture, right? Kids do leave home at 18, but you are expected to form your own life earlier. You manage your own relationships. The idea of I watched the movie in Encanto. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's amazing. But all I can see is I'm like, this is the most unhealthy relationship I've ever seen.
Yeah.
You've got an overbearing grandmother who controls adult children living under the same roof as if they are still somehow in charge, right? Not letting the individual kids and families develop into their own family unit. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, why would these, and don't get me wrong, maybe this is from a traditional masculine standpoint. I'm like, why would these children put up with this? That they're allowing this old lady to control their lives, to bark orders at them, to tell them when they have to be at the table and what jobs they have to do and when they're going to do it. That would last about 3 minutes under, a particularly, I guess, a Southern, but a traditional U.S. culture, right? It wouldn't fit at all. And, so that's just an example, right, of an extreme. Well, in that scenario, is the grandmother a helicopter parent? Well, of course she is, right? Does it thwart the ability of those children to fully develop because they aren't allowed that autonomy? Does it create the perpetual perception that you are an adult child, Well, yeah, it can, right? And we see that. And I'm not trying to knock any cultural elements there,
Yeah,
it's
I was
just
gonna
something,
say too.
it's something
I was gonna bring up the
it
fact
just
that
conflicts so hard with what our common understanding of individual development is in the United States.
I was gonna bring up the fact too. Like, we talk about this from our perspective,
Hmm.
and we talk about how helicopter parenting is. Like, I'm with you. Like, there's a certain degree where it just wouldn't work for me, and that threshold's fairly low. But cultural wise, it's one of those things that they don't. Well, one, they don't know anything different.
Hmm.
Two, it could be not only could it be a cultural, which within culture you talk about a religious thing. The religion side of it could be, and to a certain extent, depending on the culture and religion you're talking about, it could be something that they're happy to oblige. Like if you're coming into a family where the patriarch or whatnot is the or the matriarch is the one that is the helicopter parent or both. You're obliged to, because that's how you grow up as in that culture, to say that's just being respectful. That's something that is expected of you, to
Hmm.
be respectful for the grandparent, and no different. So I mean, if it's something that you're good with, then by all means, it is what it is. I mean, that's part of your culture. We're not saying that it's not bad across the board if you're okay with it. We're talking about situations where, again, we're talking about the parent and the student dynamic. We're talking about when these two things maybe not are in agreement with each other. That's where it starts to get really problematic. And it's a tough situation. I mean, like you were talking about with you know helicopter parents, and you tend to have this dependency, and then you get into your marriage, and then problems start to happen because the spouse is not it's not going the way that they were expecting, and it's not kind of things are happening that they're not particularly keen to. And I mean, I can tell you, I didn't have helicopter parents, but I had great relationships with them. I had a great relationship, or I still have a great relationship with my parents. And I I remember at the beginning of my marriage, it was one of those things that we had this come to Jesus moment where we talked through it. We had to discuss this because I needed to know her expectations, and she needed to know mine. And it wasn't like a drop down battle or anything like that, but it was just something we needed to talk about. That maybe getting into that marriage we didn't think was necessary because we just didn't know. And to me personally, and I would say you're the same way to a certain extent at that time. I think everybody is just used to how they grew up, and we assume that that's how others grow up. So
Hmm.
we assume that there's no big deal. And then you realize that it's definitely not how others grew up. But being able to talk about it, I think you're the next point you were bringing up before I brought this point up about consequences is how do you minimize the effects, or how do you minimize the helicoptering, if you will, of the parents from the student's perspective, and then possibly what are some things that helicopter parents, which I learned as I was looking this up, they're called helipats. Is the
Helipats. Okay.
that's the academic research term for it, helipats. But is there anything that helipats can do to maybe ease this need to control?
Yeah.
So what are some tips that you can give on either side?
So, having seen it in people that were close to me, some did nothing about it. Some waited too long, and it became a serious issue in their marriage. Honestly, like kids growing up, and the spouse was absolutely not willing to put up with any level of control over their relationship, right? Because I know this couple. They got married. One, the daughter was, well, I mean, knowing her mother, having known her mother, as well, the mother was extraordinarily involved, just had to be involved in everything. It affected anything she could do. She had to call and talk to the mother every single day. And if she didn't, like, there was, I mean, trouble, right? I mean, anybody she dated growing up, like, literally, if she didn't call and sometimes twice a day, like the friends would get calls and say, "Have you seen my daughter? Where is she? She didn't call me at 3. She normally calls me at 3." I mean, just that level of involvement. And so that was one of the more extreme examples I ever saw. But and I knew it would when she later got married. She married a guy who was incredibly autonomous, right? And had no level of supervision or involvement, and was really independent at a very early age. Well, it was in the psychology behind this. I talked with him, and I actually looked through some stuff. It's called an engulfer syndrome. Okay, is the term. Like, the parent wants to basically pull the new spouse of their child into the family and treat them like they're a child of the family, right?
Yeah, that wouldn't work.
No,
That wouldn't work for me.
That wouldn't work at all, right? Still wanted to control all the family vacations, still wanted to, basically felt like they could control what the child couple did in any way, shape, or form. And the husband was absolutely, and put up with it for a long time, right? It definitely caused some marital discord, but as just a couple, you can kind of put up with it a little bit better. But once you have kids, and once they had kids, and right, the parent was still excessively involved and was starting to kind of direct some of the decisions that the daughter made and stuff like that. My friend, I mean, he rebelled 100%. There was a fallout between, the wife's parents and him, and basically he laid down the law and said, "You're not going to be that involved. You're not going to be that controlling over his life." And it came to a whole conflict in the family, which I'm still not 100% certain is resolved for them. But I feel bad for the guy in a way, because this is such a it is an example of extreme helicopter parenting that carries on after the development stage, middle school, high school, even in the college to a certain extent. Because in college, lots of times the student is still dependent on the parent. And that means the parent can lay down some rules, when you come home, when you don't, and things like that. See, when I went to college, my parents, that was me leaving home. They had no control after that. Like, the idea that my parents would ever tell me that there was something I could or could not do just evaporated at 18. Like, that was just not part of my, so I know. But then I saw all these other people whose parents still controlled what they could. Like, they felt like they had to seek their parents' approval or permission to do things after they were 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 30 years old, right? They still needed their parents' approval for things. And I saw how it affected their lives. And, like I say, in the U.S., I come from more of that old school Protestant Puritan culture where, for lack of a better way of saying it, you're a grown ass man at 18 years old. The idea that you're dependent on somebody else is almost, the idea that you're dependent on your parents is almost like a weakness, right? It's kind of like, just as in the military, we used to say, a failure to launch, right?
Yeah.
Type thing. And so, everything's on a spectrum. And so from the parents' point of view, we certainly have to give some tips there. And this won't be able to resonate with them because they honestly have psychological problems that inhibit them from allowing the child to be autonomous, right? And that's probably because the parent generation then was the first, it was the introduction of they're the center of their parents' world versus you're an addition to this family, you earn your keep, that type of thing. And I think that mental construct really, permeated an entire generation, right? So that's something that the parents have to deal with. And then, of course, this new generation is growing up under the aegis of their parents, how they deal with their parents. So anyway, with that being said, I think we should give some tips that at least help them recognize and perhaps in a way deal with this relationship to most effectively.
Well, I have 3. And I'll say
Okay.
mine really quickly because mine are pretty straightforward. Mine, because we're kind of running a little late on time. But first and foremost, this is the commonality among this whole series that we're doing, which is the parent-student dynamic, is open communication. That's by far the biggest tip we can give. I don't think there's anything else we can do. Now, does that always work? No. Sometimes one side or the other doesn't want open communication about stuff because they don't want to hear the other side's perspective. But that's the first place that I would begin. The second place, and I guess the next two, from the parent's perspective specifically, but it also, you can kind of indirectly relate it into what the student can do as well, what the child can do. One is trust, work on trust, because a problem with helicopter parenting is you're not trusting the child, you're not trusting the situation, there's some lack of trust.
Or society. You're not trusting society.
Yeah, exactly. And then fear, which is the fear of something going wrong, or the fear of failure, or the fear of, and when I say fear, I guess my main thought is the fear of failure from a parent to a student. Nobody wants their kids to fail, but I do 100% agree, or I feel that everyone should fail, because failure is just a part of the process. It's not the end result. Failure is not the end result. It's just part of the process. And so if you're not failing, you're not trying. I know I'm using all these cliches, but these are true things. And I think the parents' fear of failure can really hinder the student's ability to grow. And again, the trust side, at least in our situation, trust the process. And in that, I mean, trust that you're teaching the child how to grow at an earlier age, so that way when they do get to an older age, they are mindful and they understand how to make good decisions. Like that's, to me, that's why I'm so comfortable with my son, is because he's made good decisions all the way up to this point. Why would I have anything else? Why would I have any other reason to think he's going to do something different? He's shown that he has maturity up to this level. Is he mature? No. I don't expect anybody at 18 to be, adult level mature. I'm not even adult level mature. I don't want to be. But there are certain situations where, no, I grow old. That's because it's mandatory. But there are certain situations where you have to be mature. And he has exhibited that. And I don't have the fear of him failing. He's going to fail. I get that. It's more of the acceptance side. And I think that is he going to do things where he's going to get punished at school? Yeah, he is. He's already done it. And again, we've had that conversation to where, say, is the punishment worth the reward? If you can live with it, then, and it doesn't affect your long-term goals, it doesn't affect anything like that, then so be it. But just understand you're going to get punished. Those kind of things, it helps me feel more confident. And so to me, I would say communicate, build trust in some capacity. And that's from both sides. And then work on this fear, especially fear of failure, this need to control, so you can control the outcome. Those are mine. What are yours?
Those are good ones. Well, so from the parent side, I'd start with by saying, you're 100% right. Trust the process. Allow the kid to make errors, things like that. Errors, missteps are developmental. They're not necessarily negative. So yes, trust in the system, allow that to happen. But at the same time, recognize that you have to honestly step back and create those scenarios for them. Don't try to control every aspect of what they face, right? Just be there to support them when they fall. Okay, so shift the dynamic. You want to be highly involved? Be highly involved to pick up the pieces, not to control what happens before the pieces fall, right? So that's one, okay? Be support on the other side, not preemptively, that's, retroactively after the fact, okay? Sure. So that's number one. Number two, okay, your child is not your life. You have the job of raising your child to the best of your ability and providing for them. Do not try to live vicariously through your life, through their life. Your child's accomplishments are not your accomplishments. Your expectations may not be your child's expectations. Don't push your expectations on your child. If your child is aware of your interests and the things that you're motivated by, usually they will gravitate towards those in some way because there is that natural need or natural tendency to want to emulate your parents. Okay, we start to act like our parents, whether we want to or not. So be a model for your for your kids, but do not try to live through your kids. If your kids are the center of your world and the focus of everything, and this is a problem I know for a lot of stay-at-home parents who that is their job to raise the kids. It sometimes is very difficult for them to step away and say, look, these kids have their own life. You're not living through them. So get your own life, right? Develop your own things outside of your children. They will develop better if you grant them that autonomy and they realize that you are not living through them and they are not 100% of your world. Okay. So that's part two. Be their support for the kids. Do not live vicariously through the kids. And then third, this is for the kids. Seek autonomy at all cost. Accept that you're going to mess up. Try new things. If your parents, once again, are controlling and don't allow you to try new things, figure out a way to do it. That's their failing, and their failing should not affect your development. So try things. Gain
Can I
the
add
experience.
one thing to that last point?
Absolutely.
I'm always hesitant to say go against parents' wishes. And again, we're talking about helicopters. We're talking about extreme cases here. To put the blanket statement of to do what you have to in order to. I've always been keen on the same idea where you do it, you do what you need to in order for you to succeed because it's your life. But I'm always a proponent of still maintaining some kind of respect because again, they are your parents. And granted, they may not be necessarily respectful to you depending on their ways, but you know, it's kind of that be the bigger person to a certain degree. At least the first steps. You know, if it escalates further, then that's a different story. But I'm a big proponent, like I said, of finding a way to do it in some kind of respectful way, because you don't want to burn those bridges, you know, super early, if that makes sense.
Sure. So yeah, that is a measured way you should be respectful to your parents and you should understand when they have shortfallings and that they can't let you go, that they can't grant you the autonomy that you deserve and honestly need for development. But if you're not getting it, then you have to work for it. And if you're going to develop it through a respectful means and manner, if that's possible. Some parents won't allow it. You do have to rebel. There will be no question that there is no other way. And again, that's your normal development butting up against their lack of development into what they need to be as a parent to allow you to develop fully as a child, right? But the thing is, it's not malicious on their part. So you can't be angry about it, right? You just have to understand that they just simply didn't develop, not the way that they needed to as a parent. So in that situation, you need to manage and force the relationship because otherwise you're going to wait around like my friend and get married, and then your spouse is going to force the relationship that you and your parents together were unable to line out. Because I can tell you, once you have a spouse, you should 100% be a unit, and family then is extended family, right? Your parents then are not your immediate family. They are your extended family. Your immediate family is your spouse, and that gets even stronger when you have kids. To the extent that does not remain true, will weaken the family bond. And you know, you may say, well, I may never intend to get married, right? Still developmentally, okay, it's something you need. It's something that is, you know, it's a part of life development. It's something primal about being able to survive, about being able to develop. It relates closely to ever being a leader of others, right? And so anyway, that being said, kids, sometimes you're going to have to force the relationship, but do it in as respectful a way as possible. Okay, so that's it. Yeah.
Well, good. This has been a good episode. I hope everybody enjoyed it. You got any parting words before we head out?
Yep, just remind everybody, hit us up on the website. You know, all this disclaimer is just our opinion. In many things, we are not experts, just like the things we are talking about today. We've seen a lot, but we are certainly not trained psychologists or experts. So with that being said, send us the questions. Even if we're not experts, we will talk about what you want to hear about.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there you go. So,
well, we hope you enjoyed the show. We hope to see you next time. Until then, goodbye.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Reschool'd podcast. Be sure to head over to reschool'd.com for news and other information on things we're getting into.